In the previous lecture, we saw that Hammurabi Law 146 partially parallels the story of Sarah and Hagar. Since the identification of this parallelism, other legal sources that may help us contextualize this story have been discovered. These sources show that bringing in a slave girl as a solution for childlessness was a common Mesopotamian custom in various times and places. Here is one example from an old Assyrian marriage contract.
Lakipum took in marriage Hatala. If within 2 years she has not procured offspring for him, she herself may buy a maidservant.
This contract relates to a woman named Hatala. It states that if she does not give birth within 2 years after the wedding, she is allowed to give her husband a slave girl. Or perhaps the husband is allowed to take a slave girl, but the wife is allowed to take care of the purchase and pick a specific woman. These two possible readings of the contract reflect two social concepts. One assumes that bringing in a slave girl is in the wife's interest. The other assumes that it is in the husband's. Both views are reflected in our sources. Hammurabi Law 146 assumes that it is the wife who is interested in obtaining a slave girl. This is because as an aditu, she can't have children of her own. The children in this case are considered hers. In the biblical story, Sarah expresses the same idea. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. This social concept is also reflected in the story of Jacob's family in Genesis 30. There, Rachel and Leah give their servants to Jacob, and the sons born are considered theirs. In other sources, however, taking a slave girl is considered the husband's right. Here is one example from the Old Assyrian period.
If Ishtar Lamasi does not behold an infant within 3 years, he will buy a maidservant and take her as concubine.
Here, the choice of marrying a slave girl lies in the husband's hands. The husband thus protects his right to offspring. Our third example comes from a Mesopotamian city called Nuzi, which flourished in the 15th and 14th century BCE. A marriage contract found at Nuzi states,
Kelim Ninu has been given in marriage to Shenimar. If Kelim Ninu bears children, Shenimar shall not take another wife. But if Kelim Ninu does not bear, Kelim Ninu shall acquire a woman of the land of Lulu as wife for Shenimar, and Kelim Ninu may not send the offspring away.
Here too, the barren wife must provide her husband with another woman. This is in the husband's interests. The other woman's offspring are also protected. The wife cannot cast them out. This detail is significant from a biblical point of view. In the story about Sarah and Hagar we read before, Hagar ran away because of Sarah's harsh treatment of her. However, in a later story in Genesis 21, Hagar is banished by Sarah.
And she said to Abraham, Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac.
Sarah is following here the same custom that was forbidden in the Nuzi contract. She initiates the expulsion of the other woman's son. We therefore see that the Mesopotamian documents supply us with various points of view regarding Sarah's behavior. While the Hammurabi law seems to justify her harsh treatment of Hagar, the Nuzi contract forbids her later banishment of Hagar's son. To summarize, the sources we have discussed contextualize Sarah and Hagar relationship. In giving Hagar to Abraham, Sarah acted in accordance with an accepted social convention. In acting arrogantly towards her mistress, Hagar followed a well-known pattern. In treating Hagar harshly and later demanding Hagar's and Ishmael's banishment, Sarah adopted common sanctions. We also saw, however, that the Mesopotamian sources differ in their judgment of the mistress's actions. There was no one prevalent rule governing whether the mistress is allowed to treat the slave badly or whether she may cast out her offspring. The attitude towards these social conventions differed according to time, place, and circumstances. Even the treatment of the question of whether the obtaining of a slave girl represents the wife's or husband's interests varies. The Mesopotamian texts thus supply us with the general background of Sarah and Hagar's relationship, yet they cannot tell us whether Sarah's behavior was considered morally or legally justified. The answer to these questions, if it exists, must be sought within the biblical narrative itself.